Season's great.
If you're too busy to keep up with the day's events, join us on 24 Hours Late Night. We're there when you need us most. Weeknights at 11.
Good evening, I'm Ian Hannamansing. It's Christmas Eve, but it's like no Christmas Eve in many years. Events in the world have not slowed down for the holiday. Tonight, developments in the two major stories of this incredible past week. More developments in Romania's civil war, but first, the story in Panama. It was one of the most intensive and controversial manhunts in history, and tonight, it's over. Manuel Noriega, the man the United States sent its army to catch, the man it put a bounty on, has been found. But he hasn't been captured, and it's not clear whether he will be. That's because Noriega is inside the Vatican embassy in Panama City. The ousted general apparently drove there earlier today, walked inside, and asked for political asylum. One of the main reasons U.S. troops invaded Panama this week was to capture Noriega and return him to face trial in the United States. But things didn't go as planned. For days, the army simply didn't know where he was, and now that they do, he is still out of reach. The CBC's Tom Kennedy reports.
After 4.5 days of destruction and killing, peace in Panama has a chance.
A few minutes ago, we received a report that Mr. Noriega had presented himself at the papal nunciariate and turned himself in for political asylum.
At the Nunciata, chaos, confusion too about what happens next. The French ambassador came and went, but would say only Merry Christmas. The church confirmed Noriega was there, but said nothing more. The American Defense Secretary, who arrived this evening, seemed as confused as everyone else.
There will clearly be some intensive discussions over the next few days about what his fate, what fate has in store for him. I'm not at liberty tonight to predict how that's going to sort out. I would simply reiterate what I said before. The U.S. military has done its job. They've run him to ground. Now the lawyers and diplomats will have to take over.
The church plays a large role in this Christian country. It's played a large role in recent political events, too. When Noriega thugs intimidated, shot, and beat up their patrons' political opponents, the church criticized. When Noriega stole last May's election, the church acknowledged the theft. Today, when 3 of Noriega's officers wanted to give up, it was a priest who negotiated on their behalf. But it's not a good negotiator Noriega is after, but asylum. David Amata is Noriega's friend and was his advisor. He says Noriega would never give himself up to the Americans alive.
He doesn't want to die. He has told that several times. But he has to die in complying with his duty.
But Noriega does have some options. One of them, surprisingly, came from the new government that replaced him. Washington says it has the right to bring Noriega back to the States to face drug smuggling charges. Earlier today, the new government, that is in power because of the U.S., said it may not necessarily bend to American will.
Under the Constitution of the Republic of Panama, we may not extradite any Panamanian citizen.
So the dictator leaves his fate in the hands of the church whose rules he so brutally flouted. And in the streets tonight, relief. The beginning of a new era in Panama. A Merry Christmas after all. Tom Kennedy, CBC News, Panama.
And after Tom Kennedy filed his report, we talked to him about today's sudden developments. And we asked him if the Americans have any idea how they'll proceed to try to get hold of Noriega.
No, absolutely none. I don't think they know what they're going to do. It's a tremendous dilemma for them, and it's kind of interesting, actually, because in China, in the American embassy, the Americans have given asylum to a Chinese dissident, and that Chinese dissident is called a criminal by the Chinese government. And now we have a situation where a man who the Americans consider a criminal has sought asylum in another embassy, in effect the embassy of the Catholic Church. It's a real dilemma, and nobody really knows yet how it's going to turn out. As the defense secretary said, it's up to the diplomats and the politicians.
The news certainly took us by surprise here. Was this a surprise to American forces as well, the surrender to the embassy?
An absolute, total surprise. Some of the military said they had heard rumors there was something going on. I was down in the town most of the day today, and people were saying that they had heard that General Noriega had planned a Christmas present for the American forces, and we all thought that was going to be some sort of an attack. And then lo and behold, a couple of hours later, this stunning development, he had actually given himself up.
And Noriega aside, what has it been like on the streets of Panama City today?
Well, there is still some sniping. It's still fairly dangerous in the streets, but we can get around, unlike a couple of days ago. But what's interesting now, the American military has always tied together the end of the violence and the shooting with the capture of Noriega. Now that Noriega has disappeared, perhaps the fighting will end. But also what's interesting, after Noriega gave himself up, we were going out into the streets to try and get some pictures of the party that's been happening there. And the American military at the gate here, where we are located, said that there had been some rumors of some snipers in this area, and they would not let us out because there was a password to get back into the base. And if we did not know the password, they would shoot at us. So even after Noriega gave himself up, there was still sort of menace in the air, but we're all hoping that by sunup tomorrow, that will be over.
Well, Tom Kennedy, thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank you.
Until Noriega gave himself up, the search for him was a preoccupation of the American invasion force. The Americans weren't waiting for Noriega to walk into their arms. They were out looking for him. Late tonight, there was some footage from Panama of a raid the U.S. forces made on a hotel where they believe Noriega was hiding. After days of being just behind the elusive general, the U.S. Army today believed it was just ahead of him. Here, armed soldiers are on their way to their target, and they weren't going to let anything get in their way. Using a sledgehammer, this soldier bashed away at the door, hoping to find Washington's most wanted man.
No, I told the major going to be okay, good.
Instead, he found an empty room. Noriega wasn't there. One soldier described what they found the last time they tried this.
What we saw today, they weren't just rich, they were rich of the rich. You'd have to see this place to believe it. I don't care whether you're U.S., Panama, or where, this place was something else. Yeah. They had sauna rooms, weight rooms, wine cellars. They had 5 Mercedes in there, 2 BMWs, they had a Porsche. You knew right away you had some because you walked in, they had the old Rolexes. I mean, it was just, it went on and on. So, but we didn't break anything. We were gentle of the house and we came on out.
Colonel, there's no doubt in your mind then at noon today, Manuel Noriega was in Panama City at this house.
I'm telling you, there's no doubt in my mind. In fact, she took us down to the sauna weight room. He's right by the fence where he was supposed to jumped over and got the helicopter. And we checked on both the houses and they both verified where it landed and it would have been right over the wall. We even saw a wall mark. So I'm just telling you, he is in the area.
In Washington tonight, George Bush was said by his press secretary to be gratified by Noriega's surrender. But as time goes on, Bush may run into more and more political trouble over the invasion. What was supposed to be a surgical strike and then a little mopping up may turn into an occupation that goes on longer than anyone wanted. Anna Maria Tremonti reports.
While President Bush arrived at the Pentagon for a briefing and to phone the troops, a few of his officials were busy offering further explanations to justify sending thousands of soldiers into Panama. Secretary of State James Baker defended the action and then criticized the Organization of American States. Criticism in the aftermath of the American invasion is slowly surfacing in Washington. None of Bush's advisors expected the intensity of looting and fighting that has faced the Americans in Panama over the last 5 days. The state of chaos in Panama has prompted criticism from the Democratic chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Congressman Les Aspin, a man who was quick to applaud Bush just a few days ago.
I think that the fault lies with the people making the decision with the president, advising the president. I do believe, and it's not fatal here yet, but I do believe that there was not enough emphasis on the political side. That's the weakness of this whole operation.
And he had decided to make Panama an important issue for him as a way of gaining credibility with conservatives in this country.
This analyst says neither Bush nor his advisors appear to have contemplated the depth of change Panama would face or what it would look like to most other countries.
We have resorted to a 19th or early 20th century gunboat diplomacy exactly at the time when President Gorbachev is thinking about the 21st century.
U.S. officials acknowledge they now have a greater obligation to Panama. It needs a massive infusion of funds to help rebuild its economy and continued help to get its police force and its bureaucracy in working order. Anna Maria Tremonti, CBC News, Washington.
And now on to the other major story of the day, Romania. The last remnants of Romania's old guard are fighting on tonight. Bucharest, the country's capital city, is still at the mercy of security force snipers. They are the die-hard loyalists of Romania's former dictator, Nicolae Ceausescu. And they're holding out with savage determination against what now seems inevitable, victory for the forces of democracy. It has been very difficult for journalists to make their way to Bucharest. The CBC's Gillian Findlay is in Bulgaria tonight on the border with Romania. Here is her report.
Again today, Bucharest was a city under siege. There hasn't been fighting this intense in Europe since the Second World War. Pro-democracy forces backed by the Romanian army are hunting down the ferocious Securitate police. They are the crack security team of ousted dictator Nicolae Ceausescu. The Securitate are badly outnumbered, but the army has been hard-pressed to dislodge them from key positions. That's because the Securitate are extremely well-armed and well-trained, not to mention desperate. As Ceausescu loyalists, they will almost certainly face rough justice in the new Romania. The country's provisional government said as much today on a television broadcast.
Atacuri asupra populației civile.
It promised to punish Ceausescu and his supporters with the greatest severity. The daughter of the former dictator was shown on TV, but Ceausescu himself was not, even though the army says he too has been arrested. The area around the state television headquarters was the scene of some of the heaviest fighting. Securitate attacked the building early today, killing 3 civilians before being driven out by pro-democracy forces. The death toll is now in the hundreds. Bodies are piling up in the basement of a Bucharest hospital, and a staggering number of wounded has simply overwhelmed medical workers. In Timișoara, pro-democracy forces are now in complete control. Securitate fighters are being rounded up and jailed, but as long as the battle for Bucharest rages on, democracy will not yet have carried the day in Romania. Gillian Findlay, CBC News, Ruse, Bulgaria.
As we said earlier, it is very difficult for foreigners to get to Bucharest. There are literally hundreds of checkpoints along every road leading to the capital, and at every one, people are stopped and searched. It is a dangerous trip. But tonight we spoke with a journalist who is in Bucharest, Russell Baker, and we asked him to describe the Romanian capital.
Sure. Well, the most striking thing is how the violence continues, yet we have no idea exactly who is causing it, and we also don't have a clear sense of how much control there is on the part of the so-called new authorities, if you will, against this type of thing. People who've been shooting in any situations I've been in have been up and away inside or on top of buildings. It's an incredible scene. When I was over at several of the Western embassies today, and the diplomats were describing to me how they had driven out, and in one case seen a man in a car go by and just start shooting at everyone in the crowd. They got him, they stopped the car, pulled him out, and beat him to death. It's just a surreal situation.
Russell, it also sounds like a very dangerous situation. Are civilians forced to stay inside their homes and other buildings, or can they venture outside at all?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've been out today. The incredible thing, you had to see it today, was people were out strolling. Some of them were even shopping. Stores were putting in new plate glass where the windows had either been shot out or smashed. And meanwhile, snipers were firing away in the general vicinity.
That was Russell Baker, a journalist who's in Bucharest tonight. Canada has decided to give the Red Cross $100,000 for emergency medical supplies for Romania. The External Affairs Minister, Joe Clark, says the Red Cross has a proven record in providing emergency relief. Clark also says all Canadians in Romania are thought to be safe, and the Canadian Embassy is still open in Bucharest. Pope John Paul says the bloodshed in Romania is the only sad and painful exception in a year of peaceful democratic change in Eastern Europe. He said it has been an extraordinary year because of how such momentous events took place in a peaceful way. The Pope spoke in an interview before celebrating Christmas Eve midnight Mass at St. Peter's Basilica. The traditional Mass took place at midnight for the world's 850 million Roman Catholics.
sia lodato Gesù Cristo.
The Pope's homily recounted the birth of Christ in Bethlehem. He wove his sermon around the biblical story of the angels telling the shepherds, "I bring you good news of great joy."
Questa alle moltitudini che ho incontrato in quei paesi, in Estremo Oriente, in Africa. Credo in unum Deum.
During the Mass, prayers were said for people and nations who live with tension because of injustice. Tomorrow, the Pope will celebrate Christmas Day Mass in St. Peter's and deliver his twice-yearly blessing and message to the crowd in St. Peter's Square. In Jerusalem, more than 500 worshippers were forced to leave a church where Desmond Tutu was leading a Christian midnight mass after a bomb threat. The South African Anglican Archbishop is paying a visit to the Holy Land. He just finished his sermon when church leaders told the congregation to leave. Asked about the bomb threat, Tutu told reporters, "We are in that kind of world." Today, East Germans decked the wall with boughs of holly as they threw a Christmas party for the West. Thousands of West Germans streamed over the border to take advantage of relaxed travel and exchange restrictions. And the East Germans welcomed them with champagne, fireworks, and brass bands. Jean-François Lepine reports.
For the first time since the borders started opening up between the two Germanys a few months ago, it was the turn of the West Germans today to be greeted in the East. For Klaus Richter, an East Berliner, it was another reason to celebrate. Klaus spent his 50th birthday anniversary at the Brandenburg Gate, offering free beer to the crowds. This morning, thousands of people in West Berlin took advantage of the easier crossing regulations. At the checkpoints along the wall, they discovered something that was impossible only a few months ago. No more cross-examinations, no fees, no visas, just a stamp in the passport and a small token form to fill out.
I feel very happy because I came from Berlin, from East Berlin, but I lived East Berlin before they built up the wall, 1961. So I'm the first day again in East Berlin.
28 years, it was impossible to come here, and now it is really possible.
Never
before since the Second World War had so many people poured into East Berlin at the same time. Parents with children, old couples in search of memories, foreigners looking for adventure. And never before had the East German security forces been so relaxed. What will you do today?
Oh, just looking around the dome and the palace and around the places.
All they wanted was to look around for the dome, the Alexanderplatz, Friedrichstraße, Unter den Linden, places and names that most of them had only heard of and never visited. Every half hour, hundreds would stand in silence just to witness the change of the guard at the tomb of the unknown anti-fascist soldier, as the war heroes are called here in the East. But there was another reason for today's crossings, the Christmas masses. Many of the West Germans went over to the East to join relatives in religious celebrations. At the Church of Gethsemane, where the opposition to the communist rule began, or at the Church of the Holy Mary, the oldest in East Berlin, where over the years, in spite of the restrictions, East and West Berliners have kept the tradition of praying together at Christmas. They did it again, but this time without having to go through harassment and threats. Tomorrow, Leonard Bernstein will conduct musicians from East and West Berlin in a symbolic concert in East Berlin that intends to celebrate the huge changes that have taken place. Politicians on both sides will spend a lot of time in the coming months talking about reunification and working out the future of the two Germanys. But in the meantime, the people are showing through their actions every day what they want.
Jean-Francois, what are people in East Germany expecting in the coming months?
A lot of East Germans tell us these days that they fear that if nothing practical is achieved soon, that if no result is achieved, there could be some form of impatience among the population. They also fear that the coming elections next spring would not give a clear majority to a new government. That would create unrest, they say, and that would compromise what has been achieved so far.
Jean-Francois, good night.
Good night.
Back to the Future. On Venture tonight, a look back, really back, to the 1890s and the inventions which shaped our lives, and some of the big winners and unlucky losers this year in Canadian business. Coming up on Venture right after Sunday Report.
The Soviet Parliament has declared illegal the protocols in the 1939 Nazi-Soviet pact that led to the incorporation of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania into the Soviet Union. But it hasn't passed judgment on the legality of that incorporation in 1940. The protocols were part of the deal that allowed Germany to go to war against Poland in September of 1939. Western historians have known of the secret protocols for years, but Soviet officials always claimed the originals could never be found. Today, the Soviet Parliament denounced the protocols reached by Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler as baseless and illegal. There was a massive explosion at America's second largest oil refinery today. The blast at the Exxon refinery in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, killed at least one person and injured several more. The blast set 3 sections of the plant on fire. Exxon firefighters battled the fire, and a 7-kilometer area around the blast was sealed off. The explosion was so powerful that store windows were blown out 10 kilometers from the blast. Environmental officials say they have detected no toxic fumes from the blast. The windows blasted open in stores prompted a wave of lootings in a low-income area of Baton Rouge. Finally, Governor Buddy Roemer of Louisiana had to call in 50 National Guards to help police curb looting. The last week in most of Canada has been frightfully cold, colder than most of us like to even think about. But in Canada, we're supposed to be used to this. Still, those of us who like to avoid winter try flying off to warmer climates. But today, that just didn't work if your destination was the southern United States. They're having a winter that most people have only read about or seen on television. There is snow in places where the only shovels available are for kids to play with on sandy beaches. Stan Bernard of NBC News tells us about it.
Some of the worst Christmas weather in memory. No gentle Currier and Ives seen in the Carolinas, a blizzard, 15 inches in Cherry Point and Wilmington, and drifts feet deep. Many took their first white Christmas in stride.
This is something I can't even believe it myself. I got drifts up to my handle of the sliding glass door in the back of the apartment. I just looked out this morning. I said, no, I can't believe this.
The drifting snow and icy roads cut into the plans of these people who were going to visit with families for the holidays. The bus depot in Columbia, South Carolina has become their temporary home. The weather is more than an inconvenience in Florida. Damage to the citrus crop is put at nearly $1.2 billion. That's more than half the annual crop. Fruit was described as frozen as hard as baseballs. Temperatures went as low as sub-teens, and when temperatures stay below 28 degrees for 10 to 12 hours, the damage can be permanent, killing the orange, lemon, and grapefruit trees, and destroying the strawberry crop. Many Florida growers are concerned about bankruptcy. In Jackson, Mississippi, the Pearl River froze, dropping water pressure to the city. The city was planning on dynamiting the worst of the ice. Jackson residents had to resort to buying water. This man in Dallas also had a struggle getting to water in his pool. He did not indicate he was planning on a swim. In Oakland, California, no weather problem, but there was a Christmas party for the children of Watsonville, devastated by the recent earthquake. There are 3,000 to 4,000 still without homes, spending their Christmas in temporary trailers and tent camps.
I have 3 kids and it's really hard, so that's why I'm here today, to get something for them that I can't myself get for them.
In New York, where it warmed up to the low 20s, a few of the homeless erected a large temporary shelter right near the Midtown bus terminal. Just a few blocks away on Fifth Avenue, those with homes and money were doing their last-minute shopping. But not everybody was shopping and freezing or digging out. This is Southern California, still a balmy playground, warm enough for a frolic at the beach. For so much of the rest of the country, this was the story, a freezing Christmas. But some people will always try to make the best of it, like these two deers pushing Santa on his sleigh in normally warmer Jacksonville, Florida. Stan Bernard, NBC News.
In this holiday season, a lot of people will be enjoying themselves by dancing. And in Newfoundland, some people will be doing a dance that may have the most unusual name for any dance. It's called running the goat. Brian Dubray takes us through the steps.
The dance is almost as strange as its name. It looks something like a cross between a square dance and the polka, with some traditional Newfoundland step dancing thrown in for good measure. And it's exhausting.
You think in the middle of it you're going to have a heart attack, and you can't breathe, you know, everything dries out, but you can't let the other 7 people down.
You want to stop it, you can't, right? And also another energy kicks in, and it's a high, right?
Bill Berry and Mercedes Berry have been running the goat for 5 years now. They're part of a growing group of Newfoundlanders who are reviving some of the old Newfoundland dances that had all but disappeared. Many of the dances originated in the isolated outports that dot Newfoundland's coastline. The goat hails from Harbor Deep, a town of 200 accessible even today only by boat. They've been running the goat here for years, but no one seems to know how it got its name or who created the intricate moves with names like On the Labrador and Threading the Needle. They don't do the goat much in Harbor Deep these days, but years ago it was the thing to do.
That was their whole evening, right? But if somebody wanted to step out, another couple would step in. It was the form of entertainment in town, right? For what, half a century probably.
I go out around like this, and you just follow me, right?
To keep the dance alive, Barry and his group teach it wherever they perform, from Expo 86 to Saturday night dances in St. John's.
It's just something that died out for a while, and now it's coming back. It's not just tradition. It's not keeping your culture, and it's just, you know, it's a great bit of fun.
And that, they say, is the attraction. And if by having some fun they happen to preserve a bit of Newfoundland culture, so much the better. Brian Dubray, CBC News, St. John's.
And one last note before we leave you. We had planned to run the annual Sunday Report news quiz tonight, but there was just too much news on this Christmas Eve. For CBC News, I'm Ian Hannah-Mansing. For all of us here, have a happy holiday if you're lucky enough to have one. I'll see you again tomorrow night. Stay tuned now for Venture with Robert Scully.